She has threatened it before, and she will threaten it again. Where would she go, Harry? A tradesman's daughter with my name on her. Where on earth would she go? Crispin Vaughan, 4th Duke of Morland, was still laughing at his own question when he came out of the breakfast room and found his housekeeper standing in the passage with her hands folded and her face composed into something he had never seen on it in 19 years. "Your Grace, her Grace left the house at 5 this morning." The laugh was still in his chest. It stayed there, unfinished, like a swallowed bone. "Left?" "Yes, Your Grace." "By carriage?" "By the carrier's cart to Thurlow, and then, I understand, the mail." Mrs. Ivory did not look away. That was the thing that frightened him afterwards, when he had leisure to be frightened. That his housekeeper of 19 years, who had never in her life met his eye for more than a second, looked directly at him and did not blink. "She left this for you on the escritoire in the blue room." The paper was folded once. There was no seal. "Spin," it read. "I have gone. Nothing is owed me, and I take nothing that is not mine, the shawl, my mother's ring, and 11 pounds of the pin money you were good enough to allow. I have written to your steward about the school subscriptions so that they are not interrupted. Please do not look for me. I am not in danger and I am not in distress. I have simply stopped waiting, which took me 2 years and 4 months, and I would not have you think it was done in temper. Be kind to Sarah in the still room. Her mother is dying and she is afraid to ask for the day. E." He read it 3 times, standing in the passage. "Mrs. Ivory, who is Sarah in the still room?" The housekeeper's mouth tightened by perhaps the width of a hair. "She has been here 4 years, Your Grace." "That is not what I asked." "No, Your Grace." A pause. "Her mother is dying at Cold Ashby. Her Grace has been sending the gig on Sundays since March." Crispin folded the letter and put it in his breast pocket and walked out onto the south terrace of Morland Abbey, where he stood for a considerable time looking at 300 acres of park that his wife's dowry had saved from the auctioneers, and could not remember the last thing he had said to her. He tried very hard standing on that terrace. He recovered eventually that on Tuesday he had asked her to move a screen. On Monday he had told her that the Faireyses were coming and that she need not trouble to dine with them as they were dull. On Sunday, nothing. He had gone to Thurlow about a horse. That was the whole of it. A screen, a dinner she was not needed at, and a horse. Harry Ferris found him there an hour later. "She'll come back by Friday. They always do. Sulks are a sort of weather." Harry lit a cigar with great care. "Though I'll say this, Chris, and then I'll say nothing more about it. 2 years ago you brought a girl of 22 into this house, and you have not once, in my hearing, said her name in a room she wasn't in." "I beg your pardon." "Elspeth," Harry said. "You say my wife. You say her Grace. At Doncaster you said the Crane money twice, and I watched Beverley's face and I was ashamed for you. I have never once heard you say Elspeth." Crispin did not sleep that night. He began, instead, and largely because there was nothing else to do with the dark, to find out about his own wife. It should not have taken more than an hour. He was 2 years and 4 months married. He knew where she had been born, Thurlow, over the counting-house, and the name of her late father, who had made £80,000 in Baltic timber and spent a great deal of it purchasing a duke for his only daughter. He knew she played the pianoforte tolerably. He knew she had been quiet at her wedding, and quiet at the Morland harvest supper, and quiet, he now recalled with a kind of slow horror, at almost everything. Everything else he had to be told by his servants. He was told by his valet that her Grace had sat with the boot boy for 2 hours in January when the child's hand was crushed in the mangle, and had held the lamp herself for the surgeon, and had afterwards been sick in the passage, and asked that nobody mention it. He was told by his steward, who produced a ledger Crispin had never seen, and set it down in front of him like a man laying evidence, that her Grace had for 19 months been paying, out of her pin money, the whole of the subscription to the Morland village school. £11 a quarter, plus slates. Out of her pin money, Crispin said. Yes, your Grace. She has 400 a year. Her Grace's gowns have been made up at Thurlow, your Grace, by her old dressmaker. I understand there were 6 of them, and they have been turned twice. Crispin sat back in his chair and put his hand over his mouth. He was told by Mrs. Ivory, on the 3rd day, in a tone that had passed beyond deference into something almost maternal and entirely merciless, exactly how his household had come to know before he did. Because she said goodbye to us, your Grace. To Cook, to Sarah, to Ivory in the stables, and to Belle, and to me. The housekeeper's chin came up. She came down to the kitchen at 4:30 in the morning with her bonnet already on, and she thanked every one of us by name, and said that she was going and that we were not to be blamed for not stopping her, and Cook wept, and Sarah wept, and her Grace said she was not to be pitied because she had made a free choice, which is a thing not many women get to make. A breath. And then she went out by the scullery door so as not to wake you. So as not to wake me, Crispin repeated. Yes, your Grace. She was always careful of your sleep. You keep late hours, and she used to have the passage carpets put down soft outside your door. Crispin Vaughan looked at his housekeeper and discovered, at the age of 39, what it felt like to be nobody's villain and everybody's disappointment. Mrs. Ivory, he said, I did not know a single one of these things. No, your Grace. You might have told me. And Mrs. Ivory, who had served his father and his grandfather, and had never once in 19 years said anything to him that was not respectful, said, begging your pardon, we should have had to have been asked. She had asked him not to look for her. He looked for her, and he was 6 weeks about it, and he found in those 6 weeks that he did not much like the man doing the looking. He did not use runners. That was the one decency he managed. He had begun to write to a Bow Street man in the 2nd week, and had stopped in the middle of the letter, because he could hear her voice saying, I am not in danger, and understood that to hire a man to hunt her would be to call her a liar in the only matter on which she had ever asked him to trust her. So he went himself. To Thurlow first, where the counting-house was let to a corn factor, and where an old clerk told him, with great enjoyment, that Miss Crane had been the cleverest head for figures in that office at 15, and that her father would not let her touch the books because of what the town would say. Then to her mother's sister at Redcar, who shut the door in his face, the Duke of Morland, on a doorstep in the rain, being shut out by a widow in a bombazine gown, and who was, he thought afterwards, entirely right to do it. It was the still-room maid who told him in the end, and she did not mean to. He had gone down to the kitchens himself, which caused a sensation, in order to give Sarah the day for her mother and a fortnight after. She thanked him and cried, and then, wiping her face on her apron, said the thing that broke it open. She'll be glad, your Grace. When I write to her she'll be that glad. The kitchen went perfectly silent. Cook put down a pan. You write to her, Crispin said. Sarah went white to the lips. Sarah, he heard his own voice and made it gentler than it had been in months. Nobody in this room is dismissed. Nobody in this room will ever be dismissed for having been loyal to my wife. I should like you to understand that I know precisely how little I deserve to be told, and I am asking anyway, and if you refuse me, I shall not ask twice. The girl looked at Mrs. Ivory. Mrs. Ivory, after a moment, nodded. Can see, your Grace, Sarah whispered. By the sea, she keeps the school. Kilnsea was a grey stone village on a coast the color of pewter, and the school was one long low room with 29 children in it, and a slate roof that Crispin, who now knew more about slate than any duke in England, could see at a glance had been mended within the 12-month. He waited until they came out. He waited across the road with his hat in his hands, and he watched his wife come to the door in a plain brown gown with chalk on her cuffs and see off 29 pupils by name, and he understood that he had never in his life seen her face before. Not really. Not doing anything. She saw him. She did not startle. She finished with the last boy and sent him off, and then stood in the doorway of the schoolroom with her hands quiet at her sides. "You looked for me," said Elspeth. "I did. I am not sorry, and I am not going to pretend I am." He crossed the road and stopped well short of her. "I did not set anyone else to it. I came myself, and it took 6 weeks, and I have spent all 6 of them finding out who I married. And I am ashamed," Crispin said, "which I understand is of no use to you, so I have brought 3 things instead, and then I will go where you tell me to go." He set them on the low wall between them. The first was a paper. Your dowry, the whole of it, reconveyed 80,000 and the Thurlow rents in your name and no one else's, executed and witnessed. It is done, Elspeth. It is not an offer. Whatever you decide about me, you are the 2nd richest woman in this county by Tuesday. She did not touch it. That is a great deal of money to hand a woman who has left you. It was never mine. It was the price of you, and I took it, and I intend not to be a man who kept it. The second was a ledger, thin and new. The Morland School, endowed, 400 a year in perpetuity, out of the estate and not out of anybody's pin money, and a master's house and slates, and the deed says it is founded by the Duchess of Morland, because it was, for 19 months, out of 6 turned gowns, and I have had that fact read to me by my own steward, and I would like it written down somewhere permanent. Her breath went. She put one hand on the wall. And the third? The third is only words, so I have kept it last. Crispin turned his hat over in his hands. I said something in my breakfast room on the morning you left. I said, where would she go? And I laughed. I have thought about that sentence every day since, and I have not yet got to the bottom of how contemptible it is, because I did not mean she has nowhere to go. I meant she is not a person who does things. 2 years I had you in my house, and I never once asked myself what you wanted, because I had settled that you did not want, that you were furniture with a dowry attached, and my servants knew you and I did not. His voice went. He let it. The whole of my household loved you, Elspeth, and told me nothing, and when I asked Mrs. Ivory why, she said, we should have had to have been asked. I shall hear that on my deathbed. Elspeth Vaughan stood in the schoolhouse doorway with the sea wind coming up the street, and the tears were running down her face, and she made no move to hide them. "What do you want?" she said. "I want to court you," said the Duke of Morland. "I am your wife. You are a woman who stopped waiting, and I do not intend to ask you to start again." He set his hat on the wall beside the papers. "So, I have taken lodgings at the Ship for the summer. I mean to be in Kilnsea, at that inn, and to call on you on such days as you permit and no others. I will hold your lamp when the surgeon comes. I will learn the names of your 29 and be examined on them. And at the end of it, if you tell me to go back to Morland alone and live there as your husband in nothing but law, I will do it, and the 80,000 stands, and the school stands, and I will never once say a word to make you feel it." He looked up. "But I would rather you knew that I am in love with my own wife, some 2 years and 4 months later than I ought to have been, and that I intend to be extremely tiresome about it." There was a long silence, filled with gulls. "You will be no use in a schoolroom," said Elspeth. None whatever. The boys will torment you. I shall bear it. You must not send the gig for me. I walk. Then I shall walk, said Crispin. She came down the step. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the chalk dust on her cuff and a small white scar on her thumb he had never noticed in 2 years of dining across a table from her. And she put out her hand, not to be kissed, to be shaken, as her father's clerks would have shaken it, on a bargain. Crispin took it in both of his and bent his head and held it against his mouth, and Elspeth's other hand came up and rested on his hair, and neither of them said anything for a while. He kept the lodgings at the ship for 11 weeks. He was, by common consent of Kilnsea, no use whatever in a schoolroom, though he proved unexpectedly good at reading aloud and terrifyingly good at mental arithmetic. And by August, there were 4 boys who would fight for the privilege of carrying his books to the door. They went back to Morland in October together, and the whole household was in the hall, which was not the custom and which nobody apologized for. Mrs. Ivory wept. Sarah, whose mother had died in June with a duchess's letter under her pillow, curtsied and could not speak. And Crispin Vaughan, 4th Duke of Morland, stood in his own hall with his wife's hand through his arm, and said loudly, so that it carried the length of the house and up the stairs, and into the passage where the carpets had been laid down soft outside his door, "Elspeth, my wife Elspeth, come home." He said her name in every room she was not in, for the next 30 years, until the servants at Morland Abbey grew quite tired of hearing it, and never once said so.